Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of January of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And before we start, just a few words about the current situation for Ukrainian side. Complete disaster for the Ukrainians along the entire line of combat contact. These are the words that can be used to describe the entire situation. Now let's begin and let's discuss everything in details. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 2 or 3 days we had lots of updates that the Russians managed to enter the villages of the Novaya Sorochina. Also, according to different Russian sources, the Russians managed to enter the village of Mala Loknya, but during the previous 2 days we didn't have even a single confirmation about all these statements. And today, on the 8th of January, we got the first videos and first geolocations. First, let's talk about different mappers. According to information we have, according to pro-Ukrainian service Deep State, the Russians managed to restore complete control over the territories to the west of the settlements of Orlovka, Novaya Sorochina. So these territories were captured by the Russians, and this is the situation by the end of the 7th of January. This is the situation by the end of the 8th of January. So the Russians managed to take under control these forests. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian units in the forest, those who were trying to attack the settlement of Mala Loknya and Nikolaevka from the west. The Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians, trying to slow them down. Based on this video, this morning we have adjusted this small part. And right before we start making the video, we got another video, another geolocation provided by the Ukrainian side. And in this video we can see how the Ukrainians of the 17th Heavy Mechanized Brigade were counterattacking the Russian positions between the settlements of Stara Sorochina and Nikolaevka. The video doesn't have very good quality, but if you have access to map, you can always take a look at this video. And this video shows us how the Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russian positions in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted this forest and the territory between Novostara Sorochina Nikolaevka and the settlement of Leonidovka. So all these territories were most likely captured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. Now we have no doubts that the clashes are taking place on the territory of Mala Loknya. Furthermore, the Russians established complete control over the territory with FPV drones. Everything that comes to this area from the Ukrainian side is being discovered and destroyed by the Russians, so no chances to bring additional reinforcements and reserves. The Ukrainians are suffering significant losses, and today, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, by the beginning of the 8th of January, the Ukrainians have already lost up to 50,000 soldiers. So half 50,000 soldiers just for this Sudzha offensive operation, for this massacre and nothing more. Now let's discuss the situation in the southern direction. Today the Russian sources and Ukrainian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to take under control completely the village of Makhnovka. As for the geolocations, we haven't received anything exactly from the central and from the northern part. We just have geolocations from the southern part of the settlement. In this video we can see a group of Russian stormtroopers that were moving along the village. In this video we can see how the Russians were storming the eastern outskirts of the settlement with the use of a significant number of armored vehicles, fighting armored vehicles and infantry. And in the southern part we have another video how the Ukrainians most likely were bombing and attacking the first Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group that entered the settlement 2 days ago. So now we see that the Russians are advancing. Of course, I'm not sure whether the Russians are able to establish complete control over the Sudzha direction by the inauguration of Donald Trump, but obviously by this day the Ukrainians may got critical damage, which will not allow them to hold these positions till the middle of February or till the late of February. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. Today we got lots of very interesting statements from the settlement of Dvorichna. This morning some pro-Russian sources have already adjusted the territory of Dvorichna in Russian favor. At least the southern part, the northern part still under complete Ukrainian control. And later, somewhere at 4 p.m. of Ukrainian time, the Russians reported that Dvorichna came under the control of the armed force of Russian Federation. So most likely tomorrow, the day after, we're gonna receive additional statement from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, or some Russian soldiers in this area will publish the video with the Russian flag. As for the central Kupiansk direction, there are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians are trying to destroy Ukrainian logistics and not to allow the Ukrainian Ukrainians to counterattack the Russians from behind in the area of Kolesnikovka, while the main Russian forces are trying to advance further in the direction of the settlement of Boguslavka and the settlement of Barova from the north and from the northeast. There are very heavy clashes in this area, and the Ukrainians are trying to slow the Russians down, but something tells me that it will not happen. Now let's talk about the south in Kupiansk direction. Today the Russians, according to information we have, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to the south and to the southwest of the settlement of Ivanovka. As a result of clashes, the Russians managed to take under control up to 2 company strongholds. At least this information was provided us by different mappers, mainly by pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mappers. As for geolocations, we haven't received anything that can confirm this, so we are waiting for additional updates and details from this area. If this information is correct, and if the Russians are able to take the settlement of Kolodizy under complete control, then the Russians will be able to answer the operational space, and there are going to be no barriers and no problems for the Russians to advance further in the southern direction, and the third battle for Liman is going to start. Now we're coming to the most interesting area, to the area of responsibilities of the Group of Forces South and the Group of Forces Center. The Group of Forces South during the previous 24 hours carried out another offensive operation in the direction of Ukrainian positions on the territory of Verkhnykamensk, and as a result of Russian offensive operation, they managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and probably to take under control Bila Hora, the highest point in this area, the highest elevation, and the most important strategical point in the entire Siversk direction. The Ukrainian sources of the 54th Mechanized Brigade published the video, 36 minutes length, of how they were FPV-droning the Russians in these points. As for now, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, but telling the truth, for the previous half a year, we adjusted this territory in Russian favor probably 2 or 3 times. Several times were adjusted based on some geolocations. Another once we adjusted the map in Russian favor based on the fake update of the Minister of Defense. As for now, we have adjusted the map once again. We have lots of geolocations in that 36 minutes video, how the Russians were attacking the elevation, and most likely by the end of the 8th of January the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory, but this is not the most important. The most important is whether the Russians are able to hold their positions and not to be forced to fall back from this territory under Russian-Ukrainian pressure and Ukraine FPV drone attack. So the next 24-48 hours are the vital and decisive for the Russians. If they are able to hold their positions for the next day, then most likely the settlement of Verkhnykamensk would be abandoned by the Ukrainians completely, and then the battle for Siversk is going to start. Very interesting, and the most important hours and dates and minutes are coming for this direction. They will resolve everything. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar. The Russians continue their offensive operation, and today different Russian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly from the south of the city of Chasiv Yar, and according to pro-Russian sources, everything that is already located inside of this red line was captured by the Russians by the end of the 8th of January. According to our understanding of the situation, the Russians are trying to get as close as possible to Tselkovskaya Street, to Konstantinovskaya Street. If the Russians are able to establish physical control over these territories, then the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of industrial zone would be caught in cauldron by the Russians completely, and this is going to be a cauldron, not something like operational encirclement. This is going to be a cauldron because the Russians have already cut physically the roads and the supply roads for the Ukrainians from the north and the northwest, and just the southern roads left. But if the Ukrainians realize that they are about to be captured or ambushed by the Russians, of course, most likely they will start retreat process. But the problem is that Ramstein is going to take place tomorrow. The Trump's inauguration is going to take place by the 20th of January. So most likely Zelensky will never give an order to fall back from this territory. He will try to hold the lines as long as possible, despite the losses and despite big problems that will come after the Ukrainians will decide to abandon their positions. As for the city of Toriez, during the previous 24 hours, we got additional updates from different mappers that the Russians managed to improve their positions. Some of the improved positions were confirmed by different mappers, some of them were confirmed by different geolocations. Currently, the Russians control up to 98% of the city of Toriez, just several percent left under Ukraine control, but most likely these several percent would be abandoned by the Ukrainians in the very near future. And now we are coming to the most important update of the 8th of January. Today, the pro-Ukrainian sources published the map, just map, and small article that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, and as a result of very heavy clashes, the Russians physically managed to cut N-32 road. Based on this article and based on this photo that was published by the Ukrainian side, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and the Ukrainians are saying that at this moment, so by the end of the 8th of January, the Russian armed forces decided to retreat to Vozdvizhenka, but most likely it's just something like a speculation or attempt to reduce the pressure in this direction and just to show that everything is under control. But if the Russians manage to cut N-32 road once, most likely they will be able to do this twice and 3 times and 4 times if it's necessary. So officially today, by the end of the 8th of January, the Russians for the first time managed to cross the N-32 road and to cut the supply lines between the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Konstantinovka physically. And if you remember, as we've been discussing for the previous several days, the main purpose of the Russians in this area is to take under complete control and to encircle the Ukrainians that are currently located between this road of N-32 and the city of Siversk. We're talking about this huge pocket that the Russians began offensive in this direction. Most likely this territory would be captured by the Russians during the next several months, and then the battle for the city of Konstantinovka is going to begin. We see that the Russians are intensifying their activities in this area, in the city of Chasiv Yar, in the city of Siversk, in the direction of N-32 road, and all these things are telling us that the Russians are planning to take these cities like Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka in 2025. And of course the Russians will try to do this as fast as possible. As for the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything from this area. The Russians mainly were focused on the flanks of Pokrovsk in the direction of village of Kotlina and in the direction of N-32 road. So as for the lines between the city itself and this small town of Shevchenko, no changes on the ground. And now let's discuss the situation in the Kurakhove direction. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are trying to attack the settlement of Dachne. The Russians are trying to attack the settlement from many directions, from the north, from the northeast, from the east. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to shorten the distance between the village of Dachne and the Russian positions on the territory of Kurakhove power station. The Russians are regrouping, maintaining the lines, shortening the lines, bringing additional forces and reinforcements. Currently, the Russians are very focused on clearing the city of Kurakhove. There are lots of traps, there are lots of mines, lots of problems in the city. The Russians obviously will spend lots of days to secure the territory completely, to bring headquarters, to secure area, to establish electronic warfare equipment, and many other important things. And when the Russians will create Kurakhove as another base, another headquarters, they will be able to begin advancing further in the western direction. Not like now with small steps, but they're going to be another full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to enter the Dnipro region. As for the town of Velika Novoselovka, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything in this area, just a small adjustments on the map in the direction of Novosilka, so nothing special, and we have some questions why the Russians are not advancing. Everything is seems that everything is ready to begin the final offensive in this area, but for some reason the Russians decided to pause the entire operation. Maybe they're waiting when the Russians are able to maintain the lines in the city of Kurakhove and to take under control the village of Dachne. We don't know for sure, but obviously the Russians are preparing for something, and this something is going to be very big. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.